This is Golden Years, a roadmap to navigate retirement with Mark Cordner, the podcast.
Are you looking forward to all of that free time in retirement? Well, what are you going to do with it? Have you thought about it? Wall Street Journal columnist Rachel Feinzig says that many aren't sure, and they might be even a little conflicted about losing their identity. Here's what she suggests.
Try out different activities to see which might be meaningful and bring you purpose before you actually make the shift into retirement. Talk to people who couldn't wait to spend their whole life golfing when they were retired and then found that when golf wasn't a distraction from their work, when it was the only thing they had to do, it became a lot less fun. So you might be surprised by what you actually find fulfillment in.
So interesting, she says there, to try it out, because I've heard that theory before, like even practice your retirement. So if you think you want to golf, if you think you want to travel or volunteer, take some time and really do that. And then you might discover, I don't want anything to do with this. Like, what am I going to do in retirement? And this is also a conversation you have with folks, because listen, the transition into retirement, it's exciting, but it's also a little overwhelming about, I'm not needed in the meetings anymore. I'm not needed to make decisions. Where is my identity? How do I find self-worth? These are conversations you have all the time. Mark, talk to me.
Yeah, this really is critical. And I love what she says there, because life's not about money, and transitioning into retirement can be an incredibly stressful time. It's been interesting that there's a number of big name financial people in the media who have been speaking about this lately. Kevin O'Leary from the Shark Tank and Jamie Dimon and others have been saying, don't be in such a rush to get into retirement. How are you going to spend your life? For a lot of guys in particular, it can be very stressful when they lose that structure. You know, I had an interesting conversation with my brother-in-law in his early 50s. He just recently retired a few months ago from the Metropolitan Police Department. He was a homicide detective and very well respected. But that's an intense life, as a homicide detective, living on call and dealing with the ugliest parts of human nature. And he came in a month or two after retirement and just dropping something off here at the office. And we had a conversation out on the sidewalk that was quite interesting, because he used my actual language from my classes without having attended my classes or knowing. But he said, the thing that I miss most about work isn't my buddies. And that's the point I should come back to. But he said, it's the lack of structure. He said, I find myself at 10 a.m. in the morning eating a pint of ice cream, and there's no one there to tell me not to do it, which I thought was so funny.
Yeah.
But he said that my sister was having a tough time with him being underfoot. Mm-hmm. And he was so excited to be able to come home and finally have time with his wife. And, and she kind of had her own routines and does, which is normal. For a lot of guys, this can be very difficult. I literally had this conversation just at church the other day. I was visiting with a high school buddy, and we were talking about how our 40th high school reunion had just happened, and how I had visited with some people about that, and how, particularly with the gals, many of them had these lifelong friendships going back to elementary school, which I couldn't relate to, being a military brat. But we talked about how for guys it can be very difficult, because many of us have been taught, certainly with my father, I was taught by example that once you get married, your entire focus is on your wife and children. And many guys don't have buddies, don't have friends to go out and do things with. And so we go into retirement thinking it's going to be this great time of celebration. And now we're under the wife's feet. Mm-hmm. We don't have buddies to go hang out with. And we find ourselves showing up at the old lunch haunts where our former coworkers are still eating lunch, and they're looking at you like, why are you here, kind of thing.
Right.
But Riley Moynes is a financial advisor. He's got a PhD. He's up in Canada. He talks about the 4 phases of retirement. The first being celebration, second being disappointment and despair, even for people who realize that, once retirement doesn't feel like a vacation anymore, how are they going to spend their lives? Mm-hmm. And they're disappointed because golf isn't all it was cracked up to be. Many people never get past that phase of disappointment. The third phase is experimentation. It's exploration. It's learning what kind of opportunities out there. So you can write your own story now. And as this woman, whoever it was Rachel, I think that you just quoted,
yeah,
as she points out so well, a lot of those issues can be addressed prior to retirement. We can start the exploration process in that decade prior to retirement. Some people get past the exploration stage to a sense of passion and purpose, where that last chapter of life becomes incredibly meaningful. But unfortunately, all too many Americans never make it past phase 2, that second stage of disappointment and despair even, or sometimes they get into exploration and experimentation, but they don't get past that. And so absolutely, I totally agree with what she's saying and what you're suggesting. Start practicing, start thinking about these things. I actually bought this may sound weird, but I recently bought some discussion cards for topics to discuss with my wife. And I thought, I'm going to do a variation on this for retirees, because how are you going to spend your time? Her perspective of our future is actually a little different than what I thought we were on the same page about. And we've been together for 37 years. You'd think that 37 years of marriage would have us on the same page, but we're still two different people who were raised two different ways. And this is just incredibly important to think about things before you get there, because the primary cause of disappointment in life is unmet expectations. So if you've never spent any mental energy on what to expect, then you should expect disappointment. And that's absolutely not what we want for anyone at what really should be the golden years. Truly the golden, it's not about quantity, it's about the quality of life. Golden quality experiences is what we're looking for.
Beatlemania took over the world back in the day. Gosh, decades ago. Do you remember this, Mark?
I do. I mean, that was my youth. Growing up in the 70s, that was where
it was
that's
at.
The music of my youth.
Absolutely.
You never outlive those memories.
Can't outlive it. These, couple guys, little Englishmen bringing it all back to the United States, created Beatlemania. Girls are going crazy. And there's a so-called Beatlemania boomers that are facing a retirement crisis. Research from Boston College shows that the youngest baby boomers who were born between 1960 and 1965 has significantly less wealth than older boomers. If you're wondering why, well, it's because of the Great Recession, and it hit them in their peak earning years of their late 40s and 50s. So their savings never recovered after the market tanked, and even though they were 15 years or more from retirement, they never made it back. Imagine the same thing happening just 5 years ahead of retiring. Mark, this is where you come in. How can you help protect our financial plan? How can you help protect us from something like this happening?
Well, there's a lot we can do. Again, as I've said before, we have far more control than we think we do. But let me just acknowledge what you're saying there, because I was born in 66. You're talking about people that aren't basically my age. And there is a sense of almost despair out there among some that, we're not where we thought we would be. We're going to have to work longer than we thought. We're going to have to save more than we thought. It was quite a setback. I can totally relate to that. I lost stupid amounts of money in the Great Recession, partly due to the dishonesty of other people, largely due to the dishonesty of other people, but also because of the circumstances there. So wherever you're at, let's assess, let's see where you're at, and then look at ways to improve, because we can always do better. We can always look forward. There's always hope if we're looking forward, if we're looking to the future. But, how can we help people prepare if they've had setbacks right before retirement? Well, one of the things is we got to start teaching people to think differently about their money. We don't all put it on, number 9 of the craps table or whatever it is. I'm not a gambler, but we can't just be putting it all in the market and praying that things are going to coincide with our personal timelines. Well in advance of retirement, definitely 5 years, preferably 10, we need to start implementing some preservation strategies in there that safeguards the money that we've already accumulated. I personally, right now, am preparing within the next couple of weeks to move some more money out of my 401k, out of the market, into principal protected accounts that will guarantee future income for me and my family, particularly my wife, because I fully expect her to outlive me. And so there's things we can do to safeguard our past efforts, and then we just keep thinking forward. And so there's 2-pocket strategies and all that I've talked about before. Principal protection is a key thing people need to learn about. Come visit with us, and we could turn it into English and give you hope again, because it's really about looking forward, not about looking back to what we didn't accomplish, but looking forward as to what can we do based upon where we're at now. That's where our opportunities lie, and that's where our hearts and minds and eyes should be focused.
Do we forget the lessons of history? Investment strategist Paul Dietrich tells Fox Business that we may repeat the dot-com bubble burst of 2000.
If we go into a recession, everything is going to fall, including the best stocks. I mean, Amazon was down 92.5% back in the dot-com recession. Microsoft was down 74%. Apple was down about the same amount. They're all going to fall, and partially they are overvalued. This is the most overvalued stock market that we've ever had, period.
All right, so let's break this down. I mean, he's right when he talks about the dot-com bubble, et cetera, years ago. We have seen some major players start selling off some things as of late. So should the alarm start going off and we need to be getting in defensive position for a recession, Mark? What do you think?
Well, I don't think we should panic. I think we should all realize that these recessions are normal events in the marketplace. I mean, and none of us can accurately predict exactly when they're going to occur. So we need to live our lives in a mode that will withstand those kinds of shocks to the system. I mean, when COVID hit, that was a big shock to the system, for example. The credit crisis of 2008 was a great shock to the system. And he said, back 2001, the tech bubble, when that burst, those were big shocks to the system. We can't forecast exactly when these things are going to happen. So we need to live our life with what I call a two-pocket strategy, where a portion of our money is insulated from the effects of the market, where it's not going to be lost because of market downturns that we can't control, because it's all a question of timing. The timing of those events occurs right before retirement or early after retirement, when we're having to pull money from those accounts. We really need to have a principal protected pocket into which we can reach so that we can basically buy time. It's all about time again. We cannot forecast this. I mean, God alone knows when these things are going to happen. So I don't want to panic people the way that it sounded a little bit like his tone might panic people. I don't want to do that. I would just say there's things we can do on an ongoing basis to safeguard our money so we don't have to get worked up and get all chicken little about the sky falling, because the sky will fall and the sun will come back and shine again. Those things are just going to happen. It's the nature of the economy. And so let's put together plans in place so you don't have to get neurotic about when these things are going to happen. They will happen, but they shouldn't be such that it has to stall our retirement plans or cripple us emotionally or otherwise. So let's look at these two-pocket strategies. And if people have never thought in those terms, well, come visit with us, because there's ways you can grow your money very respectably outside of the market while also having money still in the market. We just don't want to have all of our money exposed to potential loss, and especially not as we approach retirement, when people's natural emotions go towards preservation. They want to preserve their decades of work because they recognize that, again, time is the one thing we don't have an abundance of as we get older. So we have to think differently. And knowing that, let's start thinking differently now. Let's not wait until the crisis event and then try to panic and respond.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, it really comes down to being proactive now. So instead of being scared what could happen, what may happen, what somebody said is going to happen, as far as a recession or really anything for that matter, don't, put your head in the sand and say, oh my gosh, I shouldn't make a move until then. I'll just wait until, the doom and gloom and the storm passes. That's not the strategy going into retirement that you want, because you want to have, as you talked about here, Mark, that two-pocket strategy where you're going to have that protection, you're going to have that growth, you're going to be able to safeguard your money, when and if things take a turn, versus if you do nothing and keep your head in the sand, chances are you're not protected and you're not taking the approach of growth and guarantees versus risk. Does that make sense?
It does. Warren Buffett's famous for saying that when the tide retreats, you know who's swimming naked, So the tide will retreat. The tide ebbs and flows. Yeah. That's the nature of the universe. It's the nature of the economy. And so let's keep our swimsuits on. Let's not swim naked unless we want to be exposed.
That's true.
Investment advisory services offered through Golden Years Financial LLC, a registered investment advisory firm. Insurance is offered through Golden Years Insurance Services. These firms do not provide legal or tax advice. Consult your own legal and tax advisors before taking actions that may have tax implications. Investing in securities involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Insurance contracts' principal protection is based on the claim-paying ability of the respective insurer. None of the information contained on this website shall constitute an offer to sell or solicit to buy a security or insurance product. The information and opinions contained on this site or requested from this site are provided by third parties believed to be reliable, but accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed. They are provided for informational purposes only and are not a solicitation to buy or sell any of the products mentioned. Any media logos and or trademarks contained herein are the property of their respective owners, and no endorsement by those owners of Mark Cordner, Golden Years Financial, or Golden Years Insurance is stated or implied.